Chapter 1 The Elephants That Struck Work by Sir Samuel White Baker.
Many years ago, in Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, my brother and I had organized a scheme for the development of a mountain sanitarium at New Aralia. We had a couple of tame elephants employed in various works. But it was necessary to obtain the assistance of the government elephant stables for the transport of heavy machinery, which could not be conveyed in the ordinary native carts. There were accordingly a large number of elephant wagons, some of which required 4 elephants. It was the wet season upon the mountains. Our settlement was 6,200 feet above the sea, and the zigzag pass from Rambode at the base of the steep rise was 15 miles in length. The elephant wagons having arrived at Rambode from Colombo, about 100 miles distant, the heavy uphill journey began. It rained continuously. The roads were soft, and the heavily laden wagons sunk deeply in the ruts. But the elephants were mighty beasts, and, laying their weight against the work, they slowly dragged the vehicles up the yielding and narrow way. The abrupt zigzags bothered the long wagons, and their still longer teams. The bridges over dangerous chasms necessitated the unloading of the heavier carts, and caused great delay. Day after day passed away, but, although the ascent was slow, the wagons still moved upwards. Dense forests covered the mountain sides. Tangled bamboo grass crept upwards from the wet soil into the lower branches of the moss-covered trees, and formed a green curtain impenetrable to sight. The thermometer fell daily as the altitude increased. The elephants began to sicken. 2 fine animals were too ill to work. There was plenty of food, as the bamboo grass was the natural food, and in the carts was a good supply of paddy. But the elephants' intelligence was acting against them. They had reasoned and had become despondent. For 9 or 10 days they had been exposed to ceaseless wet and cold, dragging their unmanageable wagons up a road that even in dry weather was insufficient to sustain the weight. The wheels sank deep into the muddy ruts and became hopelessly impossible to move. Again and again, the wagons had to be emptied of their contents. Extra elephants were taken from the other carts and tied to the empty wagons, which, by sheer weight of animals, were dragged from the deep mire. Thus, the time had passed. The elephants had evidently concluded that there was no summit to the mountain, and no end to the steep and horrible ascent. It would be, therefore, useless to persevere in vain efforts. They determined under these heartbreaking circumstances to strike work, and they did strike. One morning, a couple of the elephant drivers appeared at my house in New Aralia and described the situation. They declared that it was absolutely impossible to induce the elephants to work. They had given it up as a bad job. I immediately mounted my horse and rode up to the pass. Under 2 miles from the summit, I found the road completely blocked with elephant carts and wagons. The animals were grazing upon bamboo grass in the thick forest. The rain was drizzling, and a thick mist increased the misery of the scene. I ordered 4 elephants to be tied to a cart intended for only 1 animal. This was quickly effected, and the drivers were soon astride the animals' necks, and prodded them with their iron hooks. Not an elephant would exert itself to draw the wagon. In vain, the drivers coaxed the elephants, then used every threat in their vocabulary, continuously prodding the massive beasts on their necks and shoulders with the iron points of their hooks. The only response on the part of the elephants was simply moving their legs mechanically up and down, and swinging their trunks to and fro. None would pull or exert the slightest, neither did they move forward a single inch. I never saw such an instance of passive and determined obstinacy. The case was hopeless. An idea struck me. I ordered the drivers to detach the 4 elephants from the harness and to ride them thus unfettered up the pass, following behind my horse. It appeared to me that the elephants were heartbroken and in despair at the apparently interminable mountain pass. It might be advisable to let them know the actual truth by showing them that they were hardly 2 miles from the summit, where they would exchange their uphill labor for a descent into New Era Elia. They would then have an extra feed with plenty of jaggery and be introduced to the companionship of our 2 tame elephants. If they passed an agreeable night with the best of food and warm quarters, they would possibly return the following day to their work, and with lighter hearts put their shoulders to the wheel instead of yielding to an attitude of despair. The result of this scheme was perfect. The elephants accompanied me to New Eralia and were well fed and cared for. On the following day, we returned to the heavy work, and I myself witnessed their start with the hitherto unyielding wagon. Not only did they exert their full powers and drag the heavy load straight up the steep hill without the slightest hesitation, but their example or some unaccountable communication between them appeared to give general encouragement. We harnessed the most willing elephants to each wagon, which they drew to the summit of the pass, and then returned to assist the others. There can be no doubt that the elephants had at once perceived the situation, and in consequence recovered their lost courage. Adapted from wild beasts and their ways, rewards and incentives motivate us to work better.